Well, tonight, as we continue our study through the book of Romans, we're going to get started with something that we should always be doing, and that's prayer. Gracious God, we give you thanks that we are able to hear your word, experience your word, and share your word. Lord, help us to dive deeper in understanding, in part of your calling, part of the witness, part of the mystery that it is to understand and know you. Draw us closer to you every single day. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Well, I sent out a video as well. I kept it short once again to try and keep it concise, but also hopefully it stirred some thoughts and ideas. In there, though, too, there were some topics, some examples that we're going to kind of talk about. In the very first section, Paul's really wrestling with righteousness. What does that mean? What does that look like? I'm just going to ask the question, what stood out to you, or what questions did it raise for you? And I'm going to go around the circle, and if you don't have anything, or if you don't have anything you want to share, you can just say, I'm good. Let's start with Judy.
I guess the one thing that I just never really thought about when he was talking about Abraham and circumcision and all of that stuff and
Sure.
Abraham's faithfulness, I guess I really never really thought about that,
Sure.
you know? And then when I thought about it, I thought, well, okay, that makes sense why Paul is now bringing that up and explaining all that. And it just kind of reinforces his whole thing of it's not just the Jews, it's the Gentiles, and, it's for everyone. So
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's having read through all of that, I guess that's the one thing that just stood out for me.
Sure.
Then you just never really connect, you're not connecting all the dots.
Absolutely. Well, let's go to the Chesvolds next.
Why did you have something? I don't think so, no. Well, there were a couple of things I thought were interesting to read. Um, like when he was explaining that it wasn't just for the Jews, it was also for the Gentiles. And I like the line, since God is one, it's like God is the one God of everything. And I just thought that was neat to see that written right there.
Yeah.
And it's for everybody. And I thought that was really kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
And I also like the part where we don't throw out the law. It's still there. We uphold it, and it makes us kind of look at it. And I like that you made that comment in your video that it's something for us to look at. We can't be perfect and
Mm-hmm.
follow it exactly, but that's something for us to strive for, I guess. Because the law brings wrath, but where there is no law, neither is there a violation. I thought that was kind of an interesting thing.
Yeah.
Because it kind of is opposite of itself, so I don't know. It's interesting. You know anything? No.
Okay. Very good. Kimball, we'll come to you next.
Um, More of just of a question than anything else.
Okay.
In the version I read today in a little devotional, it talked about in here about the difference between righteous and righteousness.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a little, um, I guess it was the wrong time of my gray cells. I was having a problem thinking about that. But I'll just bring it up later. Um, Something about confusion between the two. And anyway.
Okay. Miss Lorraine, do you have anything you'd like to share?
Not at this time.
Okay, thank you. And Cheryl, we'll come to you next.
You probably see me looking at my notes. That's what I was
No, that's
doing.
good.
Um, well, because I have two things. In 326, at least
Yes.
the way I interpreted it, Um, God selected the right and perfect time to demonstrate his justice. It looked as if sin was left unpunished, but he was always in control. And, I always tell people and always think that God does everything in his time.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know that I always believe it as much as I try to convince, myself or to say that to others. And for whatever reason, I was reading it a few days ago, but for whatever reason, I really enjoyed seeing that
Mm-hmm.
because, in this case, it took all of history, before God decided it was the right time. But, sometimes when we're going through things, I try to remember that it's God's time. It's not
Absolutely.
on my time schedule. And so I quit a long time ago praying about time schedule. And I kind of quit praying about what I wanted and kind of, but I really enjoyed that. Um, and so the next thing I had is probably really your fault. I have a bunch of different notes from different dates in these two sections. I mean, there's all the way back to 2004, and then it's actually one that I had from February of 2018. So that was probably one of your sermons. For anybody, for anybody who what. So it's 414, and it was regarding faith. And the question I really wrote back in 2018 is it enough to believe there is a God, or to is it enough to believe there is a God, or to only, let's see, I read that twice, or to only have faith in the existence of God? Because it references belief and existence as almost two different things. Or maybe, I could blame it on your
Mm.
sermon from that day. I could give you the date if you need it. No, I'm just kidding. And it's faith different than belief. And so, of course, I looked up the definitions of both of those, and I kind of modified it a little bit. But faith is complete trust or confidence in someone or something,
Mm-hmm.
and based on spiritual apprehension rather than proof. Um, and belief is acceptance that something exists. So just because that section uses it kind of differentiates them. I still don't know the answer, by the way. You can run that sermon by me again, but I still don't really know if there's a difference, if the original language just used two different versions of the same word and we just translated it different. So that's my big question for today.
I'll say that was a question and then a lot. Um,
Yeah, well,
yeah.
of course, because that's just what I do. Yeah.
No, and I think that's great. To kind of go back a little bit to your very first point was about kind of the timing of God. For so many of us, we try and point the finger and say, see, there it is. There's where God's at. And then we struggle too in other moments in our lives where we do not see God, and yet God has a hand in it. Um, it always amazes me where some people will say, God delivered me this parking spot. Um, but at the same time, too, then they struggle in understanding some of the food that comes to them, who it is that's providing for them care and other things in their life. Um, it also draws my attention, though, to the Gospels, in which everything in the skies above was pointing that Jesus was coming, and only 3 people from the east kind of saw the stars and said, oh, yeah, hey, look what God's doing. And yet all of the chosen people of God missed the mark. So it's also a reminder for us, though, too, of how often do we pay attention and how often do we understand. Sometimes we're lost so much in the emotion of it that we even lose sight of the signs that are around us. To bring up the next point, I'd really have to dive into some Hebrew or some actually Greek.
You can say that later.
For some of that, and it makes me wonder how it is. So you really had two questions there. Because your first one was about, is it enough for a person to believe that there is a God? And to kind of have all of that, is that enough? Was kind of your first question, is that right?
Well, yes. I mean, because I've heard that belief in God is enough,
Mm-hmm.
and then I've also many years ago heard a pastor say, well, that Satan believes there's a God. I mean, he obviously knows he exists.
Yep.
So that was kind of trying to differentiate what you do with that belief, I guess. But
So, and I think, yes, it's one of those things. The first commandment is the hardest commandment to do. And so it is even in that very first commandment that Paul is talking about here of just recognizing God, knowing God, but also believing in God and trusting in God. I mean, part of the idea of Satan is that he knows God, but has rejected God. And so there's that difference too of knowing versus trusting. Believing in the promise and the words and hearing those words, but rejecting those words. So there's an idea here too that Paul is saying you cannot also just pick and choose what it is you want from this. You cannot just say this is the buffet and I just want desserts, thank you very much. You need to be able to kind of wrestle with it all. You might not like it all. You might get some more broccoli, some more cauliflower. You might get something else that you're sitting there going, oh, this is for someone else. This is not for me. Oh. But then again, at the same time too, as you're sitting around the table, you can recognize how it is you need to hear that message, that word that God is speaking to us. So you can't just say, I like this, I don't like that, because then you're faltering into that first part, choosing your God. I know a number of people who wrestle with that question of, is believing in God enough? Well, believing in God is far better than rejecting God. So believing in God is enough. It's that first commandment. It's the one we all struggle with though too. But it's when we know God and we look at it and say, no, and we actually turn away. That's when we have that experience of no. Like that's where the kind of, I'll say the separation is, the line is. But even that, in and of itself, is hard for us in our human perspectives to be able to clearly say, that's a clear line. Because when Jesus looks upon it, he looks upon it and says, I see my lost sheep. I see the people I need to go after. So we may have our perspective. We may want to say, here's the line in the sand. And Jesus comes along and says, yeah, it's in the sand. Let's just move that over right here. And now you're becoming a part of it. Paul's reminding us here too that we cannot just simply say it's ours and not yours. I'll keep looking though at the Greek for next week in chapter 14 or in verse 14.
yes, 4:14.
Yep.
Yes.
So, well, we had a couple of people join us. When we were going through this, we were just kind of going through the very first section where Paul is talking about righteousness. And I just asked the question, what stood out to you, or what questions were raised in all of this reading? Miss Paula, I'll ask, do you have anything you'd like to share? You can absolutely say not at this time.
Not at this time.
All right. Thank you much. Miss Karen?
I
to say, I didn't get it all read, so
No worries.
it's been kind of a hectic day for me.
Gotcha. Well, we're glad you're here.
I am too. I didn't think this was Wednesday.
Oh, okay.
So yes, I'm here.
Well, very good. Well, and as was described before, too, as we were talking about the righteousness, Paul then brings us to an example. Someone who many of the Jewish people would point to and say, yeah, he's our prime example. We're descendants of Abraham, and because we're descendants of him, we're part of the chosen people. And that's all that really matters. And Paul just looks at you strangely and goes, really? Let's talk about that. So, Judy, you started alluding to some of that was kind of, that's something new. That's something a little bit unique now. But it also makes sense. Did you have anything more you wanted to share about that?
Not really. It's just something that I had never really thought about. You know, Abraham. I mean, his faith was great.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I don't know. It was just one of those aha moments where you're like, wow, I never really thought about that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it makes sense then that Paul is saying, when Paul's telling the people that, yeah, Abraham, he wasn't circumcised to begin, so
Right.
you're like, hey, so you don't have to be circumcised in order to believe. It can be anybody, and that's then you're like, well, because even today some people don't get circumcised. So I mean, it's just one of those things, and they're not any different than you and I, and
Yeah.
It's that was just one of those pondering moments for me.
Yeah. And I think it's a good one for us to keep coming back to, because when we studied Genesis, we talked a little bit about it, about who Abraham was, why was he chosen, all of those kind of things. But now we're putting it with a new lens and a different perspective, with new stories, new parallels.
And
yeah.
The laws, the commandments.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I heard this someplace or this is some. The laws were given by God because they were, the people needed to have rules.
Yes.
So okay, I'm just because I was reading that and I was like, okay, people had to have these are the rules and they're very strict rules.
Yeah.
None of us can keep all of them or maybe even any of them, but so I know and then Paul talks about the law,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that was more for the Jewish people to just say, yes, there are the laws, but here's faith, and through grace you're saved.
Mm-hmm.
So nobody can perfect these laws.
No one can perfect the laws, but even Paul himself would use the law and talk to the Gentiles about it. Because even the Gentiles, if he was going to the Greeks, if he was going to some of the other nationalities around them, they would know the difference between what's right and what's wrong, what it is we should do and what it is we shouldn't do. And so oftentimes he would use that as an order and a structure to help them understand why we need God in the first place. If I get those wheels to stop, that's not a good thing.
Okay, I have to think about that for a while.
No worries. Well, go ahead.
So I mean, so we have the laws, and then you have is that where punish? I mean, because you break the laws, then you have the punishment.
In many regards, yes. But I'm going to draw you back and remind you, when Abraham first received this covenant, it was just a promise. It was a gift. Yet part of that is he believed in the words. He was old. His wife was already old, had never born a child, and now he was going to believe in them. And so he did them, leaving his homeland, leaving everything that he knew, and said, okay, GPS isn't working right now, but I'm going to keep walking until you tell me to stop. And he does it. So in many regards, it is his faith. It is his belief. Then we fast forward past his children, past his grandchildren, past his great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren, and now we find ourselves no longer in the promised land given by God, but moved and become slaves in the land of Egypt. And now when they are set free from there, they had always been told what to do, how to do it, what time to wake up in the morning, and what time you're allowed to go to bed. Thank you very much. So when you have that freedom and you're not used to it, you need that discipline and organization to kind of help. And so the laws were given, but also, if you remember in Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy, and if you really want to have more time, read Numbers as well in there. And you learn how God really gave Moses all of these orders, because he even knew you're not going to get all of the laws right. The laws are there to point to you and say you're not supposed to do this because it's harmful to you, to your neighbors, to the community as a whole. Trust is going to be lost. But also with me. Because I'm your creator, I'm your sustainer. So if you guys are moving apart, that space, that gap, yes, I'm going to be there, but I want you all to be in that closeness so that we can be close together. So as he was talking with Moses, he was actually telling him how it is when you make a mistake, how it is you should right it. So there was the first 5 books of the Old Testament right there. So, all right. Anything else, Judy? Otherwise, I'm going to move on to the next person.
Yep.
Get the wheels a turning.
I know.
All right. Susan, we'll come to you next.
I don't think I have anything else to say except for I like this is a part where in the Bible where I think Martin Luther must have this is where he learned it from, that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God and are justified by his grace as a gift. It's just a gift. It's not something you have to work for. It's not something you can even ask for. It's
Yep.
just there already. And I think that's kind of comforting, since we all kind of fall very short of those things. And I also thought there was and I think one of the last, verse 21 and 4, it was talking about Abraham and his trust in God.
Mm-hmm.
He had all this trust, but he said he was fully convinced that God was able to do what he promised. And that's kind of a huge, fully convinced. I mean, I'm not always fully convinced, so it's like, wow, that to me is that's a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
Fully convinced, because when you pray for something and you hope for healing or whatever it is, am I ever really fully convinced that that's going to happen? I try to think that I am, but I don't know that I am really. I mean, there's always that little doubt nudging you, saying, well, maybe not, maybe that won't work so well. But if you're fully convinced like Abraham was, and then, Sarah had a baby at very old,
Mm-hmm.
past childbearing age, and I think that's a lot of faith and a lot of belief at the same time. I guess they're mixed, but fully convinced. I thought those are words that I guess we all have to try to think about when we're asking for things. I don't know. I thought that was a good one right there. So
Yeah. No, this is definitely a section where Martin Luther was drawing on for much of his work, because he was an anguished soul, and especially he would. So Luther was known for this. He would go to confession, walk out of the booth, turn around, and go to his confessor and say, "I'm not done yet. I forgot something. Please forgive me."
yeah, but because he wasn't fully convinced, and that probably when he read that he went, "Oh, I'm not fully convinced yet. I had to go back and get
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because that's pretty big.
It is.
So.
Dave, what about you? Anything?
No, I don't think so. No.
Okay. Well, great questions and great topics so far. Lorraine, anything from you?
No, sir.
All right. Then we'll go to Kimball.
Nothing at this time.
All right. Cheryl, we'll come to you next. Oh, she's still taking notes.
I have to write down, new things here. Well, I can't say I thought of it on my own, but like I said, I have a lot of notes in this section from different time periods. But at some point, because Judy, you had referenced like justification or when we mess up, what happens with that, because we know we can't keep the law. And someone referenced the fact that the word justification means tried but found innocent. And I thought that was a really cool way, because, God tells us that he wipes away our sin. I mean, that through Jesus, we don't have it. And I guess I like the concept of being tried and found innocent, that he cares enough to look at it. It's not just like it's just like he doesn't dismiss it, but it's like a parent. You really care for your child, and you may talk to them about what they've done that's wrong, or, but you would never turn your back on them. You would never find them guilty for breaking one of the household rules. And so I just like the concept. To me, it kind of equalizes it out. It's not like he ignores it. He actually looks at it and says, "Yeah, I know what you did, Cheryl. I think you know what you did. But you're innocent. I'm not holding you account." And sometimes it makes the weight even heavier for me that that he found me innocent when I know I was really guilty. It's like when you got off for something when you were a kid and you still wonder if you shouldn't tell somebody about it, like 30 or 40 years later, but whatever. So I don't know if that helps, but I just thought that was a real interesting perspective that someone had.
Oh, absolutely.
When they were referencing it. And then the only other, because I remember who said this in verse 4:17, God calls things that are not there. He calls things that don't exist, that aren't even there, as though they were. They fully exist for him. I mean, we know he created things, and sometimes what I do when I have the hardest time believing God is going to answer a prayer, I thank him before he does. I'm like, because that forces me to think we're going to get from this point and we're going to get to that point.
Yep.
And it's usually during the challenges where I can't do anything about it. Like, I can't do anything to make it go one way or another. I have to be patient or whatever. And I have tried to do that, and I find that sometimes helps me to but I think it's cool that he calls things just like they really are.
Yeah.
They don't exist at that time. They will in the future, but they don't exist now. I thought that was kind of cool. But again, someone else put that in my head, so that wasn't an original there.
And no, I think you're right on, and I think it also ties into the resurrection. That though there is death, now there's life. Out of the nothing, now there is life. And so I think you're right on. Yeah. Sometimes we need that reminder, though, too, in our own faith, in our own prayers. Oh, very good. All right. Miss Paula, anything from you? Any other questions?
I'm good. I'm just drinking all of this in.
Very good. Miss Karen. Oh, you're still muted. There we go.
Okay. No, I didn't finish doing all of the reading, so I'm in trouble with myself already.
Oh, no worries.
So I'm just taking it in.
Well, very good. Okay. In the midst of all of this, whenever I read through these chapters, 3 and 4, this always reminds me of confirmation. Now, some of you know what I'm talking about because you went through, I'll say, the old school Lutheran kind of confirmation. For those of you who didn't, this is maybe a taste of what it was like. If you can imagine a professor in the front of the classroom teaching children who aren't necessarily interested in learning, who would much rather be doing something, anything else at that moment, but they're also rather curious as to what things are and what things are kind of doing. Why is this so important? How can this be meaningful to me? Kind of like the idea of in math, how am I ever going to use the hypotenuse of anything to be able to figure something else out? Now, granted, I figured it out, but it didn't happen in middle school, high school when I was learning it. But I feel like a lot of chapters 3 and 4 is some of that wrestling that happens in confirmation. I'm going to tell you a lot of this information, and a lot of it's going to sit inside of you. It's going to percolate, it's going to brew, it's going to do something one day. Another example is it's going to be a seed that's planted, and one day it's going to grow. What's it going to grow into? I don't know. Is it going to be a tree? Is it going to be flowers? Is it going to be what? How big? How many? How long? It's something that I think just kind of sticks with me often for us to kind of think about. Any other thoughts or comments about these 2 chapters or ideas or topics maybe that we haven't covered yet? Kimball? No? Anyone else?
Sorry.
Oh, you're good. It's these very, I'll say, dense verses that sometimes we need to come back to. Read through twice, 3 times, 4 times. We might even come back to them towards the end of Romans to see how it is and what sticks out to us then. So, any other thoughts, comments, questions before we close? Well, seeing none, I'm just going to remind you, you can always email me or talk to me at some point if you have any questions as you're doing the readings. I hope that you are able to enjoy this and join us next week. But before we close, let's close with a word of prayer. Gracious God, we give you thanks that you continue to teach, lead, and guide. That you continue to till the soil. Lord, sometimes we just become so upset that everything got changed, everything got adjusted. Help us to know, help us to trust, and help us to see the ways in which you are making things new all around us, Open our hearts and our minds and our ears and our eyes and our lives, that we might be your disciples. We might be your seeds of growth in this world. Lord, love us, guide us, protect us, that we might serve you today and every day of our lives. Amen.
Amen.